Welcome to FreedomLovin.com, where we focus on building freedom in an unfree world. Through personal development, location independence, and passive income strategies. Now here's your host, Kevin Koskela.
Welcome to another episode of the Freedom Lovin' podcast. This is episode number 20, and this is Kevin. In just a minute, I have an interview coming up with Pete Sisco of PeteSisco.com and the book, The Freedom App. And he's got basically the blueprint for how an actual free society would work, and it's really interesting stuff. So stay tuned for that. If you like this podcast, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. I'll have the link in the show notes to this show. So you can just go to freedomlovin.com and follow that link, and it would be much appreciated to hear your feedback. And let's see, in the next couple weeks, I'm going to be having some more digital nomad types coming on the show. So really interesting guests coming up. So I hope you stay tuned and listen to those. There's a lot of stuff to be learned from these people. And I think this is kind of the wave of the future. And Pete and I talk about this a little bit in the upcoming interview I have here. So, and then also I recently put up a blog post that seemed to get some popularity, and actually was my most popular blog post yet. And I wonder if it's just because of the title or if it's useful information, but I think hopefully it's a little bit of both. The blog post is called 4 Reasons the 40-Hour Work Week is Bullshit. So I actually took out the I and put a little asterisk in there so it wouldn't offend everybody. But anyway, if you want to check that out, that's up on the blog and freedomlovin.com. And that's it for this week. I wanted to get right to the interview. Keep building that freedom and enjoy the interview with Pete Sisco, and we'll talk to you soon. Cool. Well, I'm really excited to have Pete Sisco on the show today. Pete grew up in Canada, emigrated to California in his 20s and to Idaho in his 30s. And in his 40s, he left the USA and has since lived in Belize, Mexico, China, Thailand, England, and Spain currently. Since 2006, he and his wife have been traveling the world nonstop as digital nomads. He has always had an interest in the history of human advancement toward individual freedom, and he writes about this in his latest book, which is The Freedom App, Building True Freedom Through Contractual Republics. And you can find his blog at PeteSisco.com. Pete, welcome to Freedom Lovin'.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I wanted to start out by reading a quote from your book that I thought was really applicable to what we're talking about here and what I talk about on my podcast and kind of what we're going to discuss. And you said, freedom is not an ideology to be fought for. Freedom is a technological product that protects all forms of property and displaces coercion. Freedom is a universal concept, just as geometry is. Freedom ensures the continuity of human life and the property created by human life. Coercion is opposition to life. Freedom, properly defined, can be measured with mathematical precision. As coercion approaches 0%, humankind moves asymptomatically towards the condition of freedom. So, yeah, I think that's awesome. I mean, it totally makes sense. And like we talked a little bit before the show, there's just so many definitions of freedom. What is freedom? And that's what's kind of thrown the whole thing off. And we've gone off on these tangents where what like the quote-unquote authorities are saying is freedom is nothing to do with actual, real freedom.
Yeah, well, it comes down to what definition you use. And of course, politicians don't like to have hard definitions for anything, and then that allows them to vacillate between positions and flip-flop and do all kinds of things because there's no real standard that they're measured by. But the definition of freedom I use is the societal condition that exists when every person has 100% control of his own property. Mm-hmm. And if you sort of work outward from that, a free person has control of his own property. If you think of anyone who is a slave, including going back to slavery in the United States, where a man would have a shackle on his leg and was forced to work, it's true to say that his problem was he wasn't in control of his own property. Someone else was. And in his case, the property was actually his physical body. His life was under someone else's control. And if you extrapolate that out, then in order to be free, you have to have control of all of your property and no one else. And as a society, everyone would have to be in that condition in order to truly say it's a free society. You can't do it like ancient Greece did, where you do have this aristocracy that you could say lived in freedom, but they owned slaves. So that's not a free society if some of the people are in slavery.
Yeah, that's right.
So if you use that definition of freedom, which I think is if I do say so myself, I think that's a terrific definition. That's why I use it. Then you pretty quickly realize that you and I are not free people. There's almost nothing that we have 100% control over. If you think of things that you call assets, like you own a home or you own a car. A home is the best example of something that there's so many restrictions on it. It's a wonder we even think we do own our homes. Like you can pay off the bank, you can pay for a home completely, and you have these taxes imposed on you that go in perpetuity. And you can only do certain things with the home. And you can't subdivide the property without someone else saying that that's okay. And, you need permission for all kinds of things. And if you don't cut your grass, you can get in trouble. And, if you refuse to bend to those rules, eventually you can lose the home. It's ridiculous to say that you own your own property.
Yeah, and even like a couple of shows ago, I had my friend Rich Patey on, and he is another digital nomad. And he's originally from the UK, and he came over here last month, and he got basically detained when he got here. And they said, well, the first thing that they were suspicious of was that he only had a small backpack with him, and he said he was going to be here for 3 months. And they said, there's no way, we don't believe you. And then they said they took him back to this room, and they took his cell phone, and they started going through all his messages and questioning him on everything. And basically, they were ready to send him back to the UK. And it was just completely out of his control. I mean, he couldn't do anything. He just had to answer the questions and sit there, and his life was in their hands. I mean, anything that he said could have been taken as, he must be a terrorist or he must be something, and that's it. So it just shows up. I mean, you could be the richest guy on the planet, and you still would have to deal with that situation where your life isn't completely in your control.
Right. And don't get me started on immigrants and how, every country has a bias against people from outside the country.
Yeah.
American airports now are just completely rights-free zones, whether you're from the UK or whether you're American, it says you have no rights. They can search anything, take your computer. What is the difference between that and the old Soviet Russia or some place that, we imagine as, oh boy, wouldn't want to live there. You sure got no rights there, man. They can grab you, they can put you in jail. Well, what's the difference between that and any U.S. airports?
Yeah, exactly. I want to get into this stuff, but let's talk a little bit about your background. And I'm really interested in how you became a digital nomad. You've been doing this for, over a decade now, right?
Yeah, I was a very early adopter with the internet, and then I started with ebooks. Many years ago, I wrote books that were conventional printed books that you would buy at Barnes & Noble and Borders, the late Borders, and other stores like that. And as the internet began to mature, I got online. I had my first website in 1996, which is, getting to be the Mesozoic era in internet terms. And then I started selling my books in the form of ebooks in the year, it was 2000 or 2001. I remember I used to have to explain to people what an ebook was.
Yeah.
That's how new they were back then. I did that for many years, and our kids were young and they were still in school. And as they got older, it slowly began to dawn on me that because all of my income came from the internet, there was no real need to live in any particular place. So I ended up, even when the kids were teenagers, we lived in some fun places. We lived in Belize in Central America and Mexico. And then as the kids got older and went out on their own, my wife and I continued on and have lived in Asia and Europe. Right now, as we speak, we're living in Spain. So that's how I got started. And I've turned into a real evangelist for it. I think it is fantastically liberating to be able to make an income via the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% with you there. I mean, that's the way you create freedom in an unfree world is building a product that you can sell and you can work from anywhere. So how about you have 6 kids. Was that difficult to pull off, traveling the world and having 6 kids and, working in your business?
The thing is that I was fortunate in that it was very lucrative, and you can do it on a shoestring. I know people who have done it. I was fortunate in that it was easy because I could do it the way where you spend a lot of money and do it. And as I say, I caught it when my kids were in sort of mid to late teens.
Okay.
So they were moving on. And the younger ones got the benefit of more travel than the older ones. We used to travel quite a bit in the United States, but then the international travel got to be more interesting, and we just did fun things. With two of our kids, we did about a 8,000-mile drive around Mexico, and spent several months living in Mexico. And that was just a great time. And again, it would just be impossible, and has been impossible for centuries, for humans to live like that. And now, because of the internet, it's not yet common, except for people like you and me who do this, and we end up, meeting and getting to know lots of other people who do it. Mm-hmm. But I think this is the leading edge. And I think in 10 or 20 years, what you and I do is actually going to be very common, and people would wonder why we were even talking about it like we are now, because, hey, who doesn't do that? Everybody makes their money online and lives wherever they want. That's just why wouldn't you? It's a no-brainer.
Oh yeah, totally. I think that eventually we're not going to really have jobs. There aren't going to be jobs anymore. Everyone's going to have a business. It's just a matter of what kind of business. You could do services. You could do all kinds of things that you can do from anywhere. So I think that's the way it's going to go. Now, your products were. I know you did some things in weightlifting, because I bought your book back in like 2000 or something on static contraction training. But was that kind of your start? Was the weightlifting stuff?
Yeah, that was what my online business was about. It was ebooks. There was an online training, kind of a log system that, a trainer that kept track of your progress and made calculations for you and things like that. That was another product. There were some physical products, some accessories, and an exercise machine that were physical products, but all of the sales for those were done online. 100% of the selling of those was done online, even though they were physical products that got shipped to people. So I've had a pretty broad experience with running online businesses.
Yeah, cool. So in your book, in the Freedom app, you address the problems with our society very well. I think it's a very succinct capture of what all the problems are. And why do you think that democracy doesn't work? And isn't like that the best form of government? That's what we always hear, is everyone should be in a democracy, and let's democratize everything.
Right. Well, the thing is that if you want to live in freedom, which is what people are told democracy is about. It's about living in freedom, and the freest way that people in any country can live is if they live in a democracy. If you want to talk about living in freedom, you have to have that definition, or a definition. And if you use the definition I use, which is everyone having control of his own property and life, actually, everyone control, like your life is your property. It's not someone else's property, it's your property. And if you live in the condition of freedom, you would have control over those. And the question is, do you in a democracy? Well, the evidence shows us that we actually don't. If you take a look at taxation, just the subject of taxation, one of many subjects, but it's an easy one to measure because it involves money and numbers. Approximately 50% of your lifetime production is taken from you, whether you agree to it or not, in the form of taxes. And of course, it's not just income taxes, it's sales taxes and excise taxes and employee taxes. And, they claim that there's 200 taxes on a hamburger that you buy at a restaurant. By the time it gets to you, there's 200 taxes because the truck driver who delivered the meat had to pay a bunch of taxes, and the company who made the rubber tires for the truck had to pay a bunch of taxes. And, it all comes down, it all has to get paid by the guy who eats the hamburger. That's where it stops. The last guy, has to pay all of those taxes going all the way back to whatever the genesis of the product was. So that doesn't meet the definition of freedom. If 50% of the property you produce in your lifetime is taken from you, whether you agree to it or not, that doesn't meet the condition of freedom. And the way it's taken from you is coercively. So if you really want to live in a condition of freedom, you'd have to find a way to remove coercion from the way society operates. The idea that in a democracy you have a vote and that you go with the majority. So 51% want something, the other 49% they lost, and that doesn't meet the definition of freedom.
Right. So it's the tyranny of the majority, right?
Yeah, it can be. And what happens over time, if you take a look at whoever say in the United States, whoever the president of the United States is, who is in office right now, take a look at the percentage of eligible voters who actually put him in. Most elections are pretty close. They're pretty close to 50-50, but half the people don't vote anyway.
Right.
So, so you've got, exactly. So you've got, 50% of 50%. It's a small percentage of people who actually like the guy who is making the rules at any given time. And in that sense, it's almost a tyranny of the minority.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And so then so democracy, there's all sorts of problems. I mean, your property gets taken away, your rights get voted away, things like that. But isn't it better than any other system that's come up over the course of human history? I mean, we have representatives that go and we can vote for them, and we can vote for different issues. And whereas before, we just had to agree with whatever the king said to do, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, if you had a good king, then you're better off than if you had a tyrannical king. And so, that's kind of a pick'em. And then you say, well, what if it's not a king? What if it's a pharaoh? Or, in all of those systems, there's a hierarchy where people over top of you make rules and they enforce them with a gun. So you can debate that democracies are better because they're less coercive than fascism or communism. And I think that's probably a valid argument. But, a car is faster than a horse, but it's still not an airplane.
Yeah.
And if you want freedom, you have to have no coercion.
Right.
So that's the difference between, the speed of a horse versus the speed of a car. It doesn't matter. Neither one of them flies 50,000 feet in the air. And that's the same with freedom. There are different societal systems that we've had for 5,000 years. None of them operates with zero coercion, and therefore it doesn't meet the definition of a free society.
That's right. And speaking of definition, so I wanted to ask you about what is the difference between capitalism and what we have today, like say in America?
Well, this is a thing that really pains me because I have enormous respect for capitalism, but not the capitalism that the United States has or that anyone else has. And the irony is the United States is sort of the model of the capitalist society. The United States has created such tremendous wealth in 100 years, from 1850 to 1950. What the United States did is absolutely magnificent in the history of humankind. I say that as someone who's not an American. That's not jingoism talking. That's an objective observation of the wealth the United States of America created in a century compared to all the centuries that went before. And it's nothing innately great about American intellect. Americans were from all over the world. So there was something about their system, and they were more capitalistic than any other country was. That is to say, people had more control over their property than they did anywhere else. And that's what created the production of such enormous wealth. But when you look at the United States today, it's the worst form of crony capitalism that you could really see in almost anywhere. The Russian oligarchs are pretty bad, but you see how corporations are so political now that they are very instrumental in seeing who gets elected and what regulations are made and not made so that they have an advantage and competitors have a great disadvantage. So it's crony capitalism that's as bad as the world's ever seen, as far as I know. The amount of property that's produced, but also thwarted by the use of crony capitalism in the United States is just astronomical.
Yeah, so it's this crony capitalism that is more of what we have, which is pretty much the opposite of pure free market capitalism, right?
It is. There is no free market capitalism. Every industry is regulated to the nth degree. And the corporations have learned how to play that game and get the regulations to go their way in many cases. and it thwarts competition. It is the antithesis of free markets.
Right, and I've had a lot of discussions with people about this whole idea. Like sometimes I hear people saying, well, we can't just have a capitalist system because it doesn't work, because look at the U.S., there's so many problems. But they're not getting the definition of it. They're using the U.S. as this idea of this is pure free market capitalism, and then they're saying we need to not have that. We need a kind of a combination of like socialism and capitalism for things to work. And I just look at that and go, I wish they could understand that this is not capitalism. There's nothing free market about this. And if we could have that, it would be a whole different picture. So yeah, it goes back to definitions. And I think if we could get those definitions right, we'd have a lot more people preaching the same stuff that you and I are, which is that we don't need a coercive system to have freedom.
Right. The definition I use for capitalism is the mechanism that protects all forms of property completely. So if everything you're doing is protecting people's property completely, then that's a capitalist system. If there is the ability to attack people's property, then by my definition, then you don't have capitalism anymore. And I don't know anyone who is overtly in favor of attacking other people's property. I don't know many people who would come out and say that. And it's like the definition of freedom, where every person has 100% control of his property. I don't know many people who say, no, I don't want that. I want like 15, 20% control of everyone else's property. There aren't many people who say that. It's very rare. Most of us want to do the right thing. Most of us don't interfere with property our whole lives. We stay on our side of the yellow line.
Yeah.
You could drive across the yellow line. You could drive in the wrong lane all the time if you felt like it, but most of us don't.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like that. Most of us are not thieves. Most of us don't want to take money from other people or go in their homes and steal things. It's actually a very small minority of people who want coercion.
Yeah.
And yet somehow they have managed to get their hands on the levers of society and institutionalize coercion and sell it to other people. They sell the benefits of coercion. Vote for me, and I will take something from someone else and give it to you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an honor. I mean, you just go back to like the whole idea of, they always praise JFK for putting the first man on the moon as if this is like some kind of heroic thing that he did. But really, it just comes down to, when you look at the facts, he took money from people and gave it to other people, and they built things and made it happen. But it's
right. And the thing is, and who's to say that the United States of America wouldn't have put a man on the moon in 1910 if they had a freer economy?
Right.
And it's one of those things you can't prove. It's the logical fallacy of hypothesis contrary to fact. Yeah. So you can't create a definitive argument for how it would have been even better. We would have been on the moon before 1969.
Right.
If economic circumstances have been better. You can't prove that. But in order to believe that it could not have possibly been done any quicker than it was, you have to believe that coercion is a good thing. And it should be in a society. And the way good things happen is through coercion. That's how good things happen. You want to put a man on the moon? You use coercion. You want to cure diabetes? You use coercion. Again, there aren't many people who would overtly believe that and agree with it. They can be persuaded to sort of think that way in general terms because, as I said, there's this malicious system out there that is constantly trying to convince people that coercion is a good thing for them. Vote for me, and I'll take something from someone and give it to you.
So in your book, it's about contractual republics, this idea of contractual republics. How do contractual republics work?
Well, the idea is that people can interact contractually, and then the only thing you have to adjudicate is whether or not the terms of an agreement were met. So the concept of laws and people who are lawgivers, it's moot. Because if you and I want to do something, you and I come to a mutual agreement. That another word for a mutual agreement is a contract. You and I come to a mutual agreement, and there are terms and conditions of that agreement, and then we proceed on that basis. And all that matters is whether or not you and I live up to the terms that are inside of that agreement. It doesn't matter that, oh, well, wait a minute, you were in Kansas when you signed that, so Kansas law might be applicable. Except, wait a minute, inside that agreement, you're also talking about bringing in goods from the United Kingdom. So there's an international trade law that might also apply to that. Mm-hmm. But one of us is a minority. So there's a federal law that applies to minorities. You get these ridiculously Byzantine conditions where when you go into court, nobody knows what's going to happen anyway.
Right.
Because, it's who's got the better lawyers that can dig up some obscure precedents that they can convince a judge of. It's kind of like if you had to explain the system to someone from Mars, I think you'd have a hard time, because all that really matters is what you and I agree to.
Right.
So some people will say, yeah, but you got to have laws because, people could do bad things. But all you need is somebody, the third party that is not connected with you or me, that can adjudicate whether one of us breached an agreement. Mm-hmm. And in a contractual republic, there would be serious repercussions to breaching an agreement, because the principle that the republic is founded on is nobody supports coercion. Mm-hmm. So if I cheat you in the contract, I don't live up to the terms and conditions I said I would, and I actually defrauded you and I cheat you, you can go show the evidence of that to a third party who says, yeah, in fact, that's what happened. Pete agreed to do certain things and he didn't do it. He's in breach. He has coerced you. And basically, they can say, well, he goes on the list of coercers. Mm-hmm. And the problem with me being on the list of coercers is nobody else will deal with me.
Right.
So when I want to put gas in my car, I can't. Mm-hmm. And when I want to turn on the electricity in my house, I can't. I mean, this would be an egregious case. This would be, something. Because the way to adjudicate those things is always to say, look, Pete, you did the wrong thing with Kevin here, and now you owe him $8,000. So are you going to pay him or not? Mm-hmm. And if I say, okay, I'm going to pay, well, then I'm not coercing. I'm going to pay you and there's no harm done. But if I say, no, I'm not paying, then I've got a problem. Because in a contractual republic, nobody else will contract with me. Because if they do, then they are aiding a coercer, and then they have the same problem. Well, wait a minute, you're helping coercers. So
the system sort of polices itself. Like these agencies that are taking place of the courts, they are sort of the cream of the crop. Like we'd probably have a transitionary phase where there'd be several agencies, and then the best ones would rise up, and those are the ones that would be like the gold standard, right? Where, okay, you go to that agency for all of your legal issues or whatever it is.
That's right. These would be for-profit agencies, which incidentally it pays for itself, because they would say, not only do you owe Kevin $8,000 because you didn't live up to the agreement, it took us $5,000 of our efforts to investigate this and come to the determination. So now you owe $13,000.
Yeah.
One of the manifold benefits of a contractual republic is that innocent parties are not forced to pay for mistakes and breaches that other people made.
Right.
And this is one of the cornerstones of our society. Is it's really based on the concept of a moral hazard, mm-hmm. where I talk about that in the book. I give the example of that McDonald's where a guy takes a drink and doesn't pay for it. So it's 10 cents worth of soft drink that he doesn't pay for. And the McDonald's in Florida calls the police, calls 911. They show up, they arrest the guy. It's the third time he's done it, so now it's a felony. And now he's going to go to court, and he's going to have a lawyer, and it could cost the taxpayers of Florida tens of thousands of dollars. If the guy ends up going to some jail or prison, it could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to Florida taxpayers.
Right.
And it's all about McDonald's 10 cents worth of product loss.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is an absolutely insane system. And yet we accept it as somehow, as you said at the beginning, well, it's a democracy. You can't get better than that.
Yeah.
You can't get better than innocent third parties having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for someone else's 10-cent loss. You can't get better than that?
Yeah.
You can't get better than that? You can get better than that, and I wrote a book about it.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I loved your book, because it's kind of like, entrepreneurs are always looking for ways to improve things that exist in the marketplace, and that's how they make money. And I looked at your book as kind of like a blueprint on how we can improve society, and it's like, the way you even talked about this in the book, where it's kind of like we came to this point in time where we're like, well, this is it. There's no more progress that we can make in the realm of how society is organized. And we just stopped like a couple hundred years ago or whatever. And now, there's so many ideas out there that can be better, like you've outlined. And it seems like it's time for some of these to start coming through. Now, as far as the justice services in a contractual republic, how are those not subject to corruption? I mean, I kind of know this, but I want to hear it from you and to explain to the audience.
Well, the thing is that there's no incentive for corruption because there's competition amongst, like I said, that a company would adjudicate whether or not there was a breach in the contract between you and me. So those companies who adjudicate those matters, they have no incentive to appear corrupt or to risk being corrupt or to risk being seen as corrupt because there are competitors. There are other companies doing the same thing, which is very different than the monopoly justice mechanism, so-called justice mechanism that we have in our society. You can only go to the state. You can only go to the state, and the state's attorneys and judges will adjudicate whether or not laws that they made are breached. Whereas in a free market justice system, there are competitors. So if a company does a poor job, they go out of business. And they're also liable. If you and I had that contract and I breached it and I paid a bribe to a company to say that I didn't breach it, you would have recourse. You would have recourse to go somewhere else and say, not only is Pete a coercer, I think this adjudication company is in on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you would actually have recourse. And the adjudication company is at risk because if they go on the list of people who aid and abet coercion, that they've got the same problem. The responsible employees would have the same problem when they go home. Can they put gas in their car or did they go on the bad list? Did their lights come on or did they go on the coercer list?
Yeah, I know, that's awesome. It's like if we had like a Yelp type system with government agencies, but we actually had a choice. Like there was I went down to a court here. I got a traffic ticket a couple years ago and had to go to the court, and I just was curious to see, because you can Yelp anything, you can rate any agency, so just seeing what people said about the court, because I waited in a long line and it was just really annoying. It was an annoying day, and I went on there and I think the court had like 1.5 stars like out of 5. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, if we only had a choice here, because every other business, if they got 1.5 stars, they'd be done. There's no way they could survive. But yet, this is monopolistic type of system. It's like, well, what can you do? You got to use the courts that they give us, right?
Exactly. And if you defy them, eventually you will come face to face with people with guns.
Yeah.
Not initially. You'll get something in the mail, and if you ignore that, you'll get something else in the mail. But if you continue to resist, it's only a matter of time until you come face to face with someone who has a gun leveled at you.
Right.
And that is what keeps the system in place. Make no mistake about it. These politicians are well-dressed, affable guys with nice smiles and, great social skills and great speech makers. But right behind them are people with guns who keep them in power by force.
Yep. Yeah, no doubt. Now, on kind of a positive note, in your book you say the purpose of a contractual republic is to interconnect people. I really like that quote. Can you kind of elaborate on that or explain that?
This is why I'm so excited about the time we live in. We have the ability to be so connected now, unlike any time in the past. I really think that you could have had a contractual republic 1,000 years ago. It's not technologically driven. 1,000 years ago, people could have worked in a community that operated on a contractual republic principles, and bad guys were identified, And they largely would have been thwarted. You still would have had the problem of the guy, moving 500 miles away and people in that community didn't know him, and it wouldn't have been airtight.
Yeah.
But the more interconnected we are, the stronger the concept of a contractual republic is. It is based on that system of those of us in the republic agree that we are going to operate without coercion. We're going to trade with each other under contractual terms, and we're going to honor the terms that we make. That's what we all agree. And as more and more of us operate in an interconnected way in that methodology, it means that the outliers who want to be coercive have a much more difficult time, because when somebody cheats Kevin, 50,000 people can know about it almost immediately. Mm-hmm. And that is extraordinarily powerful. And the other thing I like about the interconnectedness that's possible now is that it breaks down barriers. It breaks down ethnic barriers and national barriers and income and status barriers. Mm-hmm. All these things become moot. For years, I've worked with people all over the world. There's a fellow in New Zealand. I've never been to New Zealand, and I have not met this person. I've dealt with him for 10 years. Mm-hmm. He's done work for me for 10 years. And all those things about him don't matter. I don't know his race, his religion. I don't know his views. I don't know his sexual orientation. And he wasn't born in the same country as I was. Mm-hmm. None of it matters. It doesn't matter. We contract between ourselves, and he doesn't know any of those things about me either. And yet, we can operate to mutual benefit for years. And that is really true about people all over the world that we are frankly encouraged to dislike often, particularly outsiders. Every country has the bias against people from outside their country, I see it everywhere. In Thailand, they don't like the people from Cambodia coming in. In Mexico, they don't like the Guatemalans coming in. In the United States, they don't like the Mexicans coming in. In the United Kingdom, they don't like people coming in from Poland. It's everywhere. And the thing is, it's encouraged, frankly, because it garners votes. Mm-hmm. But in a connected, contractual society, those things aren't important. And that really promotes harmony. It promotes global harmony. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because, it doesn't matter. Like Syria right now is in terrible turmoil. But what do I have against any Syrian?
Right.
Absolutely nothing. I'd contract with a Syrian in a heartbeat if there was some service, some product or service that he could provide that I needed it wouldn't matter where the person's from. And most of us are like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a direction we're going. I mean, I hire people from all over the world, and it doesn't matter. It's like it really makes no difference, and it helps me to run my businesses. So, yeah, I think this is the future, really, more than anything. The governments just get in the way of all this, and they make it, they create all this nationalism and racism and things like that.
It's a turf war, and they're all trying to protect their turf. And the turf is the tax base. Mm-hmm. That's really the thing, that it's about keeping the screws nice and tight on the people in your country so that everything they do is skimmed. Mm-hmm. There's a way to skim all of it. And this is why they don't like the fact that you and I can make an agreement between ourselves, and just to add a layer to it, one of us could get paid in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, hey, where's my skim on that? How do they get that 50% of our lifetime production if we have any way of going outside their system?
Yeah, well, that's another reason to love Bitcoin. creates problems
right.
for them, but I'm sure they're working on ways to figure that out right now. So,
well, and to get to that definition of freedom, you have complete control of your property. Bitcoin has the potential. No one really knows where it's going to end up, but the concepts behind Bitcoin are basically, it is a contractual currency. There are certain rules that govern how that currency works, how much more currency comes into the system over time. And there's that mathematical algorithm that determines that. Mm-hmm. It's known to everybody. And as far as we know, it can't be altered. which is very different from having U.S. currency. I hold U.S. currency. We have no control. We have no way of knowing what the value of that will be in 20 years, other than to look at the trend and say, well, it'll be worth a lot less than it is now. But we aren't in control of the very nature underlying that currency. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's contractual. It's out there. This is how Bitcoin is going to work for, almost 100 years. This is how it's going to operate. And the value of it is determined by the market. It might be worth one penny each, or it might be worth $2,000 for each Bitcoin. But what will determine that is the market, not a Federal Reserve chairman.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a very powerful technology, and I'm hopeful that technology and similar ones are going to make a real difference in delivering people freedom. Because, having control over the currency you use, or being in full control of your currency, it's a lot closer to freedom than what we have now with fiat currencies.
Yeah, true. Absolutely. So now the idea of the Freedom app is basically building more freedom, for everyone. But, you and I both share this idea of building freedom in an unfree world. How do we do that? I mean, as individuals, what can we do? What can one person do to increase their freedom levels?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because the truth is that major societal changes like I'm talking about, where we move away from the coercive democratic system that we have now, majority rule, we move away from that into a contractual republic where people interact under mutually agreeable terms and conditions. That is going to take a long time. At the very least, it's fair to say it will take decades. So the thing is, what do you do in the meantime? And that is a subject that's also very dear to me, because I think that it's important to live with maximum personal freedom. And that's why, when I said earlier, I've become an evangelist for having an online business of some kind, and then having the ability to live life on your own terms, because you're not tied to sort of a brick and mortar job. And I think, to answer your question, what can one person do? I think that's it. I think that you find ways to build your personal freedom in the sense of that same thing, having control over your property and having control over your life. And that's why I've enjoyed living the way I have for many years now, which is living, in whatever country I want and doing the things that I want to do on a day-to-day basis. And I do from time to time work hard, but I enjoy what I'm doing, and I can do it from anywhere. So it's nice to have a productive day and finish up and then go walk along a Thai beach and, see the sunset and have a fantastic meal at a Thai restaurant. Or, a couple of weekends ago, I spent it looking around in some caves on the Spanish coast and having a fantastic meal of paella and, friendship with new people that I'd met. That is a wonderful way to live. And it doesn't matter really what your definition of that is. Someone might be listening to this in Minnesota and say, my idea of freedom would be able to live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and golf and do what I want, and exotic travel has no interest at all to them, then that's fine. Because it just comes down to, on a clean sheet of paper, how would you want to design your life? If you really could have it the way you wanted it, what would you want? And I am convinced that nothing can get you closer to that than having a way to earn online income. It's not. I've done a lot of things, but I've never done anything that's as liberating as this.
Yeah, totally. As far as your travels go, do you spend several months in a place and then move on somewhere else, or how do you do that?
Yeah, usually there's always immigration hurdles to get over, but I've done the thing where I've got a second passport. And I'm also a permanent resident of a third country that I don't have a passport for. So I've got quite a bit of flexibility, but it took me years to get that. That was part of my plan, was I wanted to have more flexibility. So now I've got 2 passports and a permanent residency in a third country. And I also happen to like variety, which really works for me because I'll spend, 2, 3, 4 months or even 6 months somewhere. And then I kind of get itchy feet, and then we go somewhere else. There's a lot of great things to see in this world. And I like the variety of living in different places. And we're starting to develop a bit of a circle now where we've got some favorites that we circle around to. I spend time every year in Belize, in Central America, and in Thailand. And now Spain is becoming a favorite. There's great cities all over the place, Yeah. London is a great city. Las Vegas is, more fun per square mile than any city in the world. So, but I completely sympathize with someone who says, I would just like to have a bungalow out in West Texas with no neighbor for 5 miles in any direction and just quietly do, the thing I want to do. I completely empathize with that too. I get that. And the thing I would tell that guy is the same thing. Look, I don't know any way you can do it short of inheritance or winning a lottery. I don't know of any way you could live in a bungalow in West Texas, 5 miles from any neighbor, and consistently make buckets of money every month so that you could live there and not have any financial worries. I don't know of any other way to do it than something that involves the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. There's definitely a lot of opportunity out there that people can take advantage of. And I think going forward, we have an interesting world ahead of us with all the new technologies coming out. So
it's fascinating. When you think of the rate of change, it is really, really fascinating. I envy the people that are, 10 or 20 years old today because they are going to see a massive change.
Yep.
And I think that we are heading for some dark times. I think that what the major nations of the world have done to themselves financially is going to finally collapse at some point in the near-term future. And there's going to be some dark days. But on the whole, the next 50 to 100 years are just going to be unimaginably productive.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I think we'll end it there on that positive note. Just want to mention it's PeteSisco.com. His book is The Freedom App, and you can find the book on his website, and also I'll have it in the show notes for this show on FreedomLovin.com. So Pete, thanks so much for coming on. Really enjoyed our chat.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. I hope we can do it again. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We can get a lot more topics we can get into, and I'm sure we'll have you back again.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Freedom Lovin' Podcast. To break free today, head on over to freedomlovin.com and download our free guide. 7 practical tips to living free in an unfree world.